Okay, today's lecture is on speciation, which is one of our last lectures for this unit in evolution. How do ancestors turn into different species nowadays? Okay, does that make sense? So how did one specific kind of horse turn into a couple different animals that are now different species now that we're in the present? So for speciation, some terms you need to know are, of course, what does the word speciation mean? Geographic isolation, reproductive isolation, prezygotic barrier, postzygotic barrier, coevolution, convergent evolution, and divergent evolution. So speciation, how do new species form? Okay, so speciation is the formation of a new species, which is exactly what it sounds like. Species are a group of similar organisms that breed and produce fertile offspring. Okay, so you are of the same species, like a horse and a horse, they have a baby horse, and that baby horse can grow up and have its own baby horses, then they're all a species, okay? The hybrids that we had talked about earlier, like a horse and a donkey, they come together and they have a mule, but the mule cannot have its own offspring, okay? A mule is sterile. So that is not its own species, and that's a product of two different species coming together. So remember, a species is a group of similar organisms that breed and produce fertile offspring. That's really important. And it occurs as a result of isolation. So species are separated and can no longer produce fertile offspring, and there are two main categories of isolation that you need to know. The first one is geographic isolation. So geographic isolation is when they are literally physically separated. Two populations are physically separated by geographic barriers, such as mountains, rivers, different continents, etc. And we call this allopatric speciation. Allopatric meaning other's place, and speciation meaning that they start to develop into their own species. So here's an example of salamanders in California. This was the ancestral population up here in Northern California. And then as some of them migrated this way, on one side of the Sierra, the Rocky Mountains, the Sierra Mountains? Whatever mountains there are. Oh my God, I'm embarrassed. I need more coffee. I don't remember. And the other on this side of the mountain range, as these two come together back towards Southern California, they can no longer mate and produce fertile offspring. So reproductive isolation is another kind. So this is where mating processes prevent different species from producing fertile offspring even when they live in the same area. Okay, so in this example, we have these fruit flies prefer this fruit, and these fruit flies prefer this fruit to mate on and fall in love on. So therefore, they're always going to meet on bananas. They're always going to meet on a papaya, I guess that is. All right, so the banana lovers are not going to meet papaya lovers and vice versa. So the mating processes prevent different species from producing fertile offspring even when they live in the same area. So prezygotic means before fertilization occurs, and postzygotic means after fertilization occurs. Okay, so this behavior of meeting on different fruits would be prezygotic. They are literally meeting up in different places, so they are reproductively isolated. So there are three types of reproductive isolation that you need to know about. The first one is behavioral isolation. So populations are separated by rituals and behavior. Okay? So for example, their mating ritual might be different. Such as this bird may have a different call than this bird, and therefore they're not going to mate because their mating calls are not compatible. All right. The second kind is temporal isolation, which is where two or more species mate at different seasons or times, so they do not interbreed, okay? For example, this spring-field cricket mates in the spring, this fall-field cricket mates in the fall. Therefore, they're never going to be mating at the same time, so there's no crossover, so we call that temporal isolation. And last but not least, we have sperm capacitation, which is obviously in this picture. So the sperm or body types do not allow for fertilization. This sperm will not, let's say this is a, I don't know, let's say this is a shark sperm, just for the sake of an idea. This would not be able to impregnate a dog, okay? It's like, it's never going to happen. They don't go together. So that's sperm capacitation. So post-reproduction hybrids, like I said, I talked about the mule earlier. You can see there's a Z-donk, which is a zebra and a donkey, which is kind of cute, right? A jaglion, a liger is so pretty, okay, are non-viable. They do not live long enough to reproduce, so all of these are obviously viable because they're all living to be quite old, okay, but they are sterile, so they cannot have offspring. They cannot have offspring. The liger cannot mate with the jaglion, and they have a jaglion liger. I don't even know how to say that, okay? That's never going to happen. It can't happen because they are sterile. They cannot have offspring. Not what I meant to do. Sorry, hold on a second, guys. Here we go. So which is which? Here we can see these beetles are being separated by this blue line. Okay, right here. Now they become two different areas, so we would call that geographic isolation. Okay, here we have mating activity. One mates mostly between March and April, the other one mates mostly between April and May, so that would be temporal, because it's different times. Temporal times, okay? And behavioral, you can see this is like making its little mating call, this is making its mating call, so on and so forth. None of these mating calls are the same, okay? Therefore, that is behavioral. So, in your notes right now, I would like you to highlight and review terms in red below. So what is the difference between geographic and reproductive isolation? So you need to answer this on the back of your lecture notes for full points. Okay, so number one, what is the difference between geographic and reproductive isolation? Number two, what is the difference between prezygotic and postzygotic barriers? And number three, give examples of each of the above terms. So please make sure you write that down on your paper. And when you are ready, then you can press play again. And we have these last few things which you will have to jot down on your notes somewhere. All right, so there are three types of evolution. There's coevolution, convergent evolution, and divergent evolution. Coevolution is where two or more organisms evolve together so that one exerts an evolutionary pressure on the other. For example, we know that if there's more predators, the prey population is going to go down, so they co-evolve. Parasites and hosts, plants and herbivores, these are things that evolve at the same time because the other one's evolving, and it has to evolve in response to that evolution and vice versa, back and forth. Here's some examples of that. I'm trying to think, does that have that, does it tell you what this is? No, okay. Sorry, I couldn't remember. Go back. This is an excellent example of coevolution. This is called a, what is it called? It's called a tongue parasite. This beetle goes in fish's mouths and eats its entire tongue away. So you can see this is what's left of the fish's tongue, which is pretty nasty. And then it pretends to be the fish's tongue and eats all the food the fish is trying to eat until the fish eventually starves to death, and then that beetle leaves and either finds another fish to live in or dies off. Okay, so these two things have co-evolved. The fish isn't really getting any benefit from this, but the the parasite has evolved to mimic a fish's tongue so that the fish doesn't even know that it's missing its tongue anymore, which is kind of sad. Convergent evolution is when an environment selects similar features in different unrelated populations. So it is beneficial for all different species on Earth to be able to detect light, right? It is helpful as a human, it's helpful as a bee, it's helpful as a dog, because that's how we navigate where we're going. So we've all developed these eye-like structures. Now the human eye and a dog eye and a cat eye and a shark eye and a bee eye, they're all very different. But this is an example of convergent evolution. Even though they're different, they're all used for the same purpose, which sounds exactly like the definition of analogous structures. Okay? So remember, analogous structures, they have no common ancestor, but they have a common function. So that is developed through convergent evolution. We can see, obviously, fins between dolphins and sharks and other types of fish. That's all a common purpose, even though they didn't develop the same way. Same thing for a bat and a birdwing. They do not have a common ancestor. Birds lay eggs. Bats are mammals, okay? And their wings are obviously made of very different materials, but they have the same purpose. So these are all analogous structures. Divergent evolution is when two or more related populations become more and more different. So divergent means to split or divide into two ways, okay? So usually this results in different habitats and can eventually lead to speciation. So just like that example of the salamanders back in the beginning of this lecture, right? We said in California, here's my beautiful drawing of California. You're welcome. I'm so great at art. Okay, here's our little salamander dude. That's him. Okay, as they separated, they became very, very different. And even though they met, again, down towards the bottom, they had gone their own ways and had changed in their own ways so much that they became different species. So we can see here's an ancestral butterfly, and it became two different kinds. We can see that there was a common plant that turned into kohlrabi and Brussels sprouts and cabbage and cauliflower and broccoli and kale. Okay, so this is divergent evolution. Common ancestor, now they are different species. Divergent evolution causes a population that diverges doesn't always form new species. Okay, it is possible to get many from one, and this is what we call adaptive radiation. So adaptive radiation is when all of a sudden this one bird has now developed into 10 different birds because the different islands they were on, the different food they were able to find, and the different niches that they fulfilled. So that is all on this kind of stuff. So now after this, you need to play three activities in Quizlet to review for the test on next Wednesday. These will all count as points in your grade, so please make sure that you get that done. And I hope you guys have an excellent weekend. Don't forget that this Saturday, I have Talon, and you have to sign up online for it. Okay? That's all.